In the 8th century, Mercia was the dominant power in southern England. Under kings like Offa, it stood as the heart of Anglo-Saxon rule, shaping politics, culture, and military strength. But no kingdom holds power forever. In 825, Mercia suffered a crushing defeat against Wessex at the Battle of Ellendon. That moment marked the beginning of a shift in power. Mercia and Wessex, once rivals, became uneasy allies. Yet together they resisted the growing Viking threat. But then came the storm. In 865, the Great Heathen Army landed in East Anglia and pushed into Mercian lands. Mercia paid the Vikings off, trying to buy peace, but it was a temporary solution. By 877, the kingdom had lost its eastern territories, leaving only the western half under new leadership, though that leader depended heavily on Viking support. But as they say, fortune changes with the tides. In 878, King Alfred of Wessex turned the tables at the Battle of Edington, defeating the Viking army and shifting the balance of power. It was now slowly that Wessex and Mercia regained control. By the 890s, Alfred's son Edward and Mercia's ruler Aethelflæd continued the fight, holding back new waves of Viking attacks. A rebellion flared in 899 led by Æthelwold, Alfred's nephew, but ended with his death in 902. Mercia's story was far from over. A new leader was about to rise, one who would carve her name into history, not as a king, but as a warrior queen. Aethelflaed was born around 870 when England was a land of shifting borders and constant battles. She was the eldest daughter of King Alfred the Great and his wife Aethelflæd, a woman with noble Mercian blood. Aethelflæd's father, Æthelred Musel, was an ealdorman of the Gaini, a powerful Mercian noble family. Her mother, Eadbert, may have been a descendant of King Coenwulf of Mercia. That lineage made Æthelflæd a Western Saxon princess and half Mercian by birth. This bloodline would later prove crucial, allying with the two kingdoms. As Alfred's daughter, she grew up in a world where learning and strategy were just as important as war. Her father, known for his love of scholarship, ensured that his children, daughters included, were well educated. Unlike many noble women of her time, Æthelflæd would have been taught not only about scripture and history, but also about governance, diplomacy, and perhaps even military strategy. Her destiny, however, was shaped by politics. In the 880s, Æthelflæd married Aethelred, Lord of the Mercians. He was much older than her, and the marriage was not a love match, it was a political alliance that sealed a growing bond between Wessex and Mercia. Alfred's will, written in the 880s, makes special mention of her. He refers to "my eldest daughter," granting her land and wealth, a sign of her high status. Æthelred too received a valuable gift, a sword, worth the same amount as Æthelflæd's inheritance. The first official record of their marriage appears in a charter from 887, but they may have wed even earlier. The age gap between Æthelflæd and Æthelred raises questions. Some suggest that she played a significant role in ruling alongside him early on. They had one known child, a daughter named Elfwin. One remarkable figure also lived under their roof, Aethelstan, the eldest son of Edward the Elder. He was raised at the Mercian court, possibly as part of a political strategy to gain Mercian trust. Some say he even fought in the battles against the Vikings, learning the art of war from his aunt and uncle. While Æthelred's exact lineage remains unclear, some believe he had royal Mercian blood, perhaps tied to King Burgred of Mercia and Alfred's sister, Aethelflæd. If true, this could have technically made Æthelflæd and Æthelred cousins, violating church law. But whatever the case, their union was about power, not personal ties. Together, they would shape Mercia's destiny. But as the Viking threat grew stronger, it became clear that one of them would rise to lead Mercia into one of its most decisive battles. By the late 9th century, while much of England reeled under Viking attacks, western Mercia remained an unusually stable region. The heartlands, Gloucestershire, Worcestershire, Herefordshire and Shropshire, were spared the worst devastation that struck Northumbria, East Anglia and Wessex. Viking armies focused on wealthier targets, leaving western Mercia relatively undisturbed. This allowed something remarkable to happen. While the war raged elsewhere, Mercian scholarship and religious life flourished. Worcester, in particular, became a renowned intellectual centre, earning respect at the courts of King Alfred and later his son, Edward. The city had long been a stronghold of learning, and under Aethelred and Aethelflaed's patronage, it continued to thrive. Gloucester rose in prominence, becoming a strategic and political stronghold for Mercia's rulers. Here, the couple set about strengthening their territory. They recognised that fortified towns, as Alfred had built in Wessex, would be crucial in resisting Viking incursions. In Gloucester, they rebuilt ancient Roman defences, mirroring the successful town model. The Mercian Witan, or council, even met there in 896, a sign of its growing importance. But it wasn't just about military strength, they both also understood the power of religious symbolism. In 909 they made a bold move. They had the remains of St. Oswald, one of England's great royal saints, transferred from Bardney Abbey in Lincolnshire to Gloucester. This wasn't just about faith, it was politics. Housing the relics of a revered saint turned Gloucester into a spiritual centre, reinforcing its position as Mercia's heartland. They rededicated a church in Oswald's honour, a clear declaration that Mercia was not fading, it was reviving. Later, when Ethelred and Aethelflaed died, they would both be buried in the church they had built for St. Oswald. Meanwhile, their commitment to religious patronage stretched beyond Gloucester. In much Wenlock, they donated land and a golden chalice to the shrine of St. Milberg, cementing their ties to the church. They struck a significant deal in Worcester. They fortified the city with King Alfred's approval. Still, they negotiated a unique agreement with the clergy. Control of Worcester's wealth would be shared between Mercia's rulers and the church, and in return, the clergy would pray for them, ensuring their spiritual protection. By 904, they had also secured valuable riverfront land, tightening their grip on trade routes and reinforcing Mercia's economic stability. While the rest of England faced turmoil, Aethelflaed and Aethelred built something lasting, a strong, well-defended and culturally thriving Mercia. But soon the battle for survival would take an even greater turn. By 911, change was coming. Ethelred's health had been in decline for years. Some sources suggest that as early as 902, he was already too weak to rule effectively. Aethelflaed, ever the strategist, began taking on more responsibility. Some believe she was already the de facto ruler of Mercia before her husband's death. While Wessex and Mercia had spent years on the defensive, by the 910s they were preparing to take the fight to the Vikings. A major turning point came in 910 when a Danish army invaded Mercia. This time, the Anglo-Saxons launched an aggressive counterstrike instead of merely defending. Mercian and West Saxon forces intercepted the invaders at the Battle of Tettenhall in Staffordshire. It was a decisive victory. The Danish army was shattered and its leaders slain. Aethelflaed wasn't credited with leading troops in battle, but her strategic influence cannot be ignored. She had already reinforced Mercia's strongholds, ensuring her lands were well protected. Some scholars argue that she played a role in the campaign's planning, but either way, the victory at Tettenhall marked a shift, and now Mercia and Wessex could go on the offensive. The same year, Aethelred died. Instead of stepping aside for her brother Edward, Aethelflaed took control of Mercia. She assumed the title of Lady of the Mercians. It was unprecedented. In Wessex, royal women were never given such power. Even Alfred's wife had been kept in the background. But Mercia had a different tradition. Aethelflaed's aunt Ailswith had once been Queen of Mercia, and there was a history of powerful women in the kingdom, and the Mercians accepted her rule. Even Edward, who had quickly seized control of London and Oxford after Ethelred's death, did not challenge her. Some believed he allowed her to govern Mercia in exchange for her loyalty. Others suggest she had enough support from the Mercian nobility to rule independently. Regardless, Aethelflaed had authority, and she intended to use it. Her next move now would be to cement her legacy as a warrior queen. Aethelflaed was no passive ruler. She immediately expanded Alfred's town system across Mercia. With the Viking threat still looming, these fortified towns were not just military strongholds, but centres of trade and governance. Between 910 and 918, she established or reinforced key towns, including Chester in 907, rebuilding its Roman defences and making it a northern stronghold. In 913 was Stafford, a key defence against Viking advances in the Midlands. Again in 913, Tamworth, a crucial centre for controlling access to Mercia's heartland, and in 914, Warwick, it strengthened as part of an expanding network of fortifications. Each of these towns played a role in securing Mercia from future Viking raids, and by 917, Aethelflaed was ready to take the fight to the enemy. That year she attacked Derby, one of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw. The battle was fierce and she lost 4 of her best ministers, but emerged victorious, and Derby fell under Mercian control. The following year she captured Leicester without bloodshed. The Danes surrendered to her rule, recognising her strength. But then came the greatest twist. The Danes of York offered to submit to her. It was an astonishing turn of events. The Viking leaders of York, constantly threatened by Norse raiders from Ireland, saw Aethelflaed as their best chance for protection. If she had lived longer, she might have secured Northumbria without lifting a sword, but fate had other plans. On the 12th of June 918, Aethelflaed died at Tamworth. Her body was carried 75 miles to Gloucester, where she was laid to rest beside her husband in St Oswald's Minster. Her death came mere months before Edward completed the conquest of the southern Danelaw. Some argue that if she had lived, Mercia might have remained independent. Others believe Edward was always destined to absorb it. Regardless, one thing is certain: Aethelflaed was no ordinary ruler. She was a warrior, a strategist, a builder of strongholds, and a woman who shaped the future of England. When Aethelflaed died, she left behind an unfinished story. Mercia had been reborn under her leadership, fortified, strengthened, and victorious in battle. She had taken the fight to the Vikings, not just holding the line, but expanding Mercian control. The Danes of York had even looked to her for leadership. But her sudden death raised an urgent question: who would rule Mercia now? The answer should have been her daughter, Aelfwine. The Mercians immediately declared Aelfwine as Lady of the Mercians, following in her mother's footsteps. However, her rule was short-lived. 6 months later, in December 918, King Edward the Elder marched into Mercia and deposed her. It was a quiet coup. There was no battle, no rebellion, and perhaps because Edward's forces were overwhelming, or because Aelfwine lacked her mother's influence. Edward seized control, took her to Wessex, and ended Mercia's independence. For over 2 centuries, Mercia had been a kingdom of its own, shaping the destiny of England. But with Aelfwine's fall, that era was over. Edward went on to complete his conquest of the Danelaw, but in Mercia, not everyone accepted Wessex's rule. In 924, an uprising broke out, a final flicker of Mercian resistance. Edward crushed it, but soon after, he died at Fondant-on-Dee, in what had once been the heart of Mercian territory. Had Aethelflaed lived longer, would things have gone differently? And could she have secured York and forced Edward to treat Mercia as an equal partner? And could her daughter have continued her rule? It's one of history's great what-ifs. What is certain is that with Aethelflaed's death, Mercia's independence died too. Aethelflaed's legacy was shaped by who told her story. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written under West Saxon influence, downplayed her rule, calling her King Edward's sister, whereas the Mercian Register gave her full recognition as the Lady of the Mercians, treating her as a true ruler. The The Irish and Welsh annals were even more generous, referring to her as a queen, something she was never officially called in England, to the point where the Annals of Ulster described her as a renowned Saxon queen. Later historians painted an even more vivid picture. John of Worcester called her the delight of her subjects and the dread of her enemies. William of Malmesbury praised her enlarged soul, and Henry of Huntingdon wrote a poem about her, declaring a queen by title, but in deeds a king. Some scholars believe she ruled alongside Aethelflaed even before his decline, shaping policy and military strategy. Others argue that she was always overshadowed by her brother Edward, pointing to the fact that coins bore only his name and not hers. But one of the most intriguing theories is that she raised Edward's son, Aethelstan, in the Mercian court. If true, it may have been a calculated move, preparing a future king who would respect Mercian traditions. Later, when Aethelstan became the first king of England in 924, he was heavily influenced by Mercian customs. Was this Aethelflaed's doing, and did she ensure that even if Mercia lost its independence, its influence would endure? It's a compelling possibility. So how should we remember Aethelflaed? She was never officially called a queen, yet she ruled as one. She led armies, built fortresses, and expanded her realm, not just defending Mercia, but conquering territory. Her victories at Derby and Leicester were just as crucial as her brother Edward's conquests. Yet her story has often been overshadowed because she was a woman in a world of kings. Had she been a man, she might be remembered as one of England's most significant early rulers. Instead, history often remembers her only in connection to her father, Alfred the Great, or her brother, Edward the Elder. But in truth, Aethelflaed was a ruler in her own right. She was not just a passive noblewoman or a pawn in political alliances. She was a warrior, a strategist, a builder of strongholds, and a leader who commanded the loyalty of an entire kingdom. Would England have united without her? Probably, but it would not have happened so quickly. Would Edward have conquered the Danelaw without her? Perhaps, but her victories paved the way. And would Mercia have remained independent if she had lived longer? That is the greatest question of all. Aethelflaed's story is one of the most remarkable in medieval history. She defied expectations, ruled with authority, and led Mercia to its greatest military triumphs in generations. Her death marked an era's end, but not her legacy's end. Today, her name is gaining more recognition as one of England's most important early rulers. Was she England's first warrior queen? That depends on how you define it, but what is clear is this: Aethelflaed was no ordinary woman. She was a ruler, a conqueror, and a force that shaped the future of England, and that is how she should be remembered.